All right, let's dive right in, shall we? Today's deep dive is going to be, well, a bit of a head scratcher. We've got a case study here about a crude oil pipeline. And it's facing some pretty surprising corrosion issues. Even the experts were kind of stumped by this one.
Yeah, it really challenges a lot of our assumptions about corrosion management. We always think about adding more protection, right? But this case study really highlights how flow dynamics, like the environment inside the pipeline, can totally change the game.
Okay, so got to paint a picture for our listeners here. We're talking about a pipeline that stretches 10 miles, 10-inch diameter, carrying crude oil from 10 different sources.
Right, and it's not just a little bit of oil either. We're talking a massive amount, 50,000, sometimes even 200,000 barrels of oil every single day.
Wow, okay, so this is a major pipeline. Big responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This pipeline has a corrosion inhibitor program, right? You'd think it'd be pretty well protected. But after only 5 years, they're seeing 50% wall loss because of corrosion.
5 years. That's way too fast. And the report says that inspections show that this corrosion is, it's ongoing. That's a huge red flag, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely a major concern.
So we've got this pipeline, billions of dollars worth of oil flowing through it every day, and it's falling apart way faster than anyone expected. What's the deal here?
That's the question, right? And the report breaks it down by looking at these different, what they call flow cases, basically simulations of how the pipeline behaves under different conditions.
Okay, so different scenarios.
Exactly.
Walk us through these flow cases then. What did they find?
All right, so flow case #1, this is the best case scenario. All 10 sources are online, pumping oil at a high flow rate.
I'd think that high flow would mean more wear and tear, more corrosion, more oil rushing through would just, speed things up.
It seems intuitive, but it's actually the opposite. See, at high flow rates, the oil and water in the pipeline, they don't separate as much. It's like if you think of a blender.
Oh, okay, so everything's mixed up.
Right, so the water, which is what really drives corrosion, it can't settle out and causes many problems.
So it's all about preventing that oil and water from separating. That's what they call slippage, right, in the report.
Exactly.
But the report also mentioned that even a small amount of water can cause problems. They were talking about 50 barrels.
Right, because if it's allowed to sit there, in contact with the pipe for a long time, even a small amount can be an issue. But in this high flow scenario, that water doesn't have the chance to settle. It's constantly being mixed back in with the oil. So the estimated lifespan for the pipeline in this case, over 40 years, even without any extra corrosion protection.
Over 40 years, wow. Compared to 5 years that they're actually getting?
Yeah, a huge difference.
So high flow, good. Okay, what about flow case 2?
All right, so in this case, one of the major sources goes offline. It's the one responsible for 55% of the flow. So the flow rate drops significantly.
Okay, so now we're in low flow territory. The water has more chance to settle out.
Right, exactly. And that creates conditions that are more favorable for corrosion. You get more water accumulating along the pipeline.
Okay, so is that why the corrosion is happening so fast?
It's part of it, but here's the thing. Even with that increased risk, the estimated lifespan is still over 40 years in this scenario.
Wait, really? 40 years? But the pipeline is, falling apart right now, so something's still missing from the picture, right?
Yeah, and this is where flow case #3 comes in. They keep that same low flow condition from case #2, but this time they add oxygen ingress at the tie-in points.
Oxygen ingress. Okay, that sounds bad. What does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means oxygen is getting into the pipeline. And when oxygen mixes with that settled water, especially in low flow conditions, it accelerates corrosion. And not just any corrosion, we're talking about pitting corrosion.
Pitting corrosion, that sounds worse than regular corrosion.
Yeah, it is. Think of general corrosion it affects the whole surface of the pipe. It's gradual, but pitting corrosion is like these concentrated attacks, little pits or holes that can eat through the pipe wall way faster.
Okay, I'm starting to see the problem here.
Yeah, it's a big one. And when they factor that into the estimated lifespan, it drops to less than 10 years.
Wow. Okay, so oxygen is the real problem here. And the pipeline already has that corrosion inhibitor program, right? Why doesn't that help?
Well, that's the thing about corrosion inhibitors. They aren't a magic bullet, right? In this case, the inhibitor probably wasn't getting to the stagnant water where those pits were forming.
Yeah, so it was just kind of useless in those low flow zones.
Pretty much. Most inhibitors rely on the oil flow to spread them around, coat the pipe. But when the water settles out, the inhibitor can't get to those areas effectively.
Okay, so what did they do? Just pump in more inhibitor?
You'd think so, right? But they went a different route. They decided to modify the environment inside the pipeline. They started injecting monoethylene glycol, or MEG, at the source that kept going offline.
MEG. Okay, what does that do?
It's pretty cool, actually. MEG mixes with the water and changes its properties. Basically, it makes the water a lot less corrosive, even when there's oxygen present.
So instead of trying to fight the corrosion directly, they're changing the playing field altogether.
Exactly. And it worked. This targeted approach, they were able to mitigate that corrosion risk without having to pump inhibitors through the whole pipeline.
That's impressive. It really shows that understanding the root of the problem can lead to a much better solution. So what we've learned so far, I guess, is that these seemingly small changes in flow dynamics, they can have a huge impact on how vulnerable a pipeline is to corrosion.
Absolutely. And we've seen how oxygen ingress can be a really sneaky problem, especially in low flow situations.
And the biggest lesson, I think, is that sometimes the best solution isn't to just add more chemicals. Sometimes you have to get creative and modify the environment itself to make it less corrosive.
Absolutely. This case study really drives that point home.
This case study has been fascinating, really, but it makes me wonder, how much of this applies to other pipelines or even like totally different industries? Is this just a weird one-off thing, or are there like broader lessons here?
You hit the nail on the head. That's a really good question. And the report, actually, they touch on that too. It's focused on this specific oil pipeline, but the underlying principles, they're way more applicable, like flow dynamics, finding those weak spots, then, tailoring your approach.
What are some of the big takeaways? What can we learn from this whole thing?
The biggest one, I think, is the importance of data and analysis. These engineers didn't just throw some inhibitor at the problem, right? They did some serious modeling to figure out exactly what was going on.
Yeah, they figured out it was those tie-in points and the oxygen getting in there. That was the root of the problem.
Exactly. And having that detailed understanding, that let them come up with a targeted solution, something that actually worked and wasn't a total waste.
It also highlights how important monitoring is, doesn't it? Like, just because you have an inhibitor program doesn't mean you're in the clear. You need to be checking things regularly to catch any surprises.
Absolutely. Monitoring, proactive analysis, and being willing to, change your approach if needed. That's how you keep a pipeline healthy in the long run.
It's like this constant feedback loop, right? You're always learning, adapting based on the data you're getting.
Right. By being proactive, we can not only keep our infrastructure running longer, but we also minimize, environmental damage, economic losses, all the bad stuff.
This whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I feel like I have a totally new appreciation for how complex this whole corrosion thing is.
It's a field that people don't really think about until something goes wrong, right? But as we've seen, it's essential for keeping our world running safely and reliably.
So as we wrap up this part, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the main message is that corrosion is a process. It's dynamic. You need a holistic understanding of the system, its environment, how it all works together. Then you can actually manage it.
And like you were saying, with that understanding, you can move away from just reacting to corrosion and start actually preventing it.
Exactly. It's a total mindset shift from damage control to prevention and optimization.
So let's say our listener, they're responsible for a pipeline or really any system like that. What are some things they can do to actually put this proactive approach into practice?
The first thing, the most important thing, is really understanding your system inside and out. That means gathering data, materials, operating conditions, how the flow works, the environment, anything that could affect corrosion, basically.
It's like building a profile of where the system is most vulnerable.
Right. And once you have that, then you can start identifying those critical points where corrosion is most likely to happen. And this is where those flow simulations and analysis tools, the stuff we talked about before, that's where those come in handy. And once you've found those hot spots, then you can develop a targeted plan.
And the key is it's targeted, right? You're not just throwing a solution at the whole system. You're focusing on the areas that need it most.
Yep. Makes it more effective, usually cheaper too, and better for the environment.
Okay, so we've got the data, the analysis, and the targeted approach. What else is important for this proactive thing?
Can't forget about monitoring, regular inspections, keeping an eye on the data. You got to make sure your plan is working and catch any problems before they get out of hand.
So it's like this constant loop, right? You're always learning, adapted based on what the data tells you. This deep dive has been, honestly, it's been a game changer. I feel like I've learned so much about how important corrosion management is and how complex it really is.
It's one of those things people don't think about until it's too late, but it's all around us, It's essential for keeping our world running.
So to wrap things up here, what's the one message you want our listeners to take away from this whole conversation?
I'd say corrosion is a powerful force, but it's not unbeatable. If we understand it, use science, and take a proactive approach, we can manage it and even prevent it.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of corrosion. Until next time, stay curious.